right, let's testify tonight.
Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet. And I could stay here forever, Lord, but you call me to something more. And I hear you say that you have a plan to use every broken woman and man to display just how good you are. We are your living pieces of art. What good does it do to hide away when all of my scars are a picture of grace? All right. So I will testify of the power of God. Tell the world of the hope I have found. For my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, do you believe it? Has He done it for anyone else? I said, has He done it for anyone else? Cause the God that I serve, He's always at work. Has He done it for anyone else? So come on and testify of the power of God. Come on and tell the world of the hope we have found. For our body was broken, our hearts were made whole, and that's too good to keep to yourself. Come on and testify of the power of God. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify your voice. This is my. So I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify. Come on, take it up. Jesus, my champion, the victor of grace, the only one worthy of all of my praise. Yeah. So come on and testify. Oh, somebody lift Him high. Come on, testify of the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. Oh, for my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Sing it. Oh, my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, let's do that right now.
And good morning. Just to warn you guys, well, I'm kind of doing the Dutch angle thing today. I guess I'm in a Batman villain lair. But just to warn you guys, this is going to be not a super long live stream like I usually do on Sundays, because I have to go about once a month. We meet a friend of ours for lunch, and then we have to help our friend, Joshua is going to do all the heavy lifting because I ain't doing it, but help friend move a piece of furniture upstairs, and then we have to take Joshua to a church thing, and we also have to take my daughter to work. And so we're going to be running around like crazy in a little over an hour. So from now until then, you have me. We'll talk about whatever you want to bring up. And about the first topic of the day from Gorilla is electric mowers suck. And let me just say this: I would say that electric mowers have their place, but it's like with electric cars, and like actually more accurately, like with electric pickup trucks. They can be very effective, but they are not industrial. Not yet. Because while electric powered devices, as opposed to gasoline powered devices, are far more efficient, far more cost effective, far lower in maintenance and that kind of thing, which is all great. And you have, like, especially with electric cars, you have 100% of the torque all the time. But if you put a heavy load against it, it drains its power very quickly, because if for and that's why like electric trucks, like you might have a truck that has a 500-mile range like the Denali, but then if you tow a big old boat behind it or thing, then all of a sudden that 500-mile range is only a 200-mile range, and so it's the load you put on an electric device makes a huge difference as to how much electricity it draws, and the battery has a finite amount of power. When it comes to mowers, I think that electric mowers can work, but I don't think they'd be good if you have a particularly large or tough grass situation. Like you have taller grass or anything like that. I would say that for regular weekly maintenance type mowing, if your lawn is fairly well kept, electric mower would be fine, and it would be more efficient and cost effective than a gas powered mower. But if your lawnmower has to do a lot of work when you take it out, then yeah, probably not a good idea, because you start hitting those blades against thick, unruly grass, and like you said, it's going to clog all the time, and that could definitely be a problem because there's just not enough power there to keep those blades spinning. That's my 2 cents on it. Like I actually, if I had the money, I would love to get one of those newer electric zero turn mowers. Miss Moneypenny is in the house. Stan Lee is in the house, and says, never had a lawn big enough to have anything on top, saying that his mower had an electric cord. Yeah, I couldn't do a power cord to mow my lawn. It's too big. It's about the lawn is probably about a third of an acre, and so yeah, it's pretty sizable when you combine the front and back. And unfortunately, now I'm just not physically capable of doing it without unless I got something like a nice zero turn mower. But I can't afford a nice zero turn mower, so I got to pay a guy to come out every couple of weeks just to do the bare minimum cutting, and even that costs me like $50 every 2 weeks. It's rough. Like yeah, nice guy, but it's expensive. How's the heat in here today? It's not too bad. I turned the air conditioner on last night, and it was a fairly cool night. So it's actually not too bad right now. But under normal, so what I've been trying to do is, at least until I get set up downstairs, I turn the AC on like the day before I do a live stream. But that runs up the electric bill, which is why I'm trying to get things set up downstairs. Let's see. Miss Moneypenny is in Fort Wayne, Indiana, because she's doxing herself. Why not? Yesterday was my nephew's funeral. I didn't hear about your nephew. Oh, yeah, wait, did I? I'm trying to remember. Man, my brain is mush today. But I'm sorry. I hope that you were okay. Loopy01 says something that El Avshalom SRG, Jesus is messenger. Jesus is a messenger. Well, Jesus was a lot more than a messenger. A messenger from a biblical standpoint, is what you would call an angel, and Jesus was definitely not an angel. Granted, I know, and who knows, I don't know where you stand theologically, Loopy. I don't think I've ever talked to you. I mean, if you are a witness, you believe Jesus was an angel. However, I consider that particular belief blasphemy. I have a very small yard, and the batteries only last 10 minutes of mowing. I'm on my second day of mowing, and I just started the backyard. Sounds like you have a very underpowered mower. What, Pringle? Yeah, mine all been plugging, not battery powered. Yes, I know. No, she comes over, she hits my leg, and then she runs away like she's playing a game. Yeah. No, come here. Come on. You want to come here? She's being silly. And then Jesus is a messenger like Abraham. Well, there I would absolutely disagree. Abraham was just an ordinary guy who was chosen by God to be the father of the nation of Israel. Jesus was not an ordinary man. And there's Miss Moneypenny doing her emoji thing with Gorilla's name. And then Loopy says, do not follow church, but messenger. Well, then I would say you're not listening to the message. Because the message says to go to church. And Gorilla says, hey, Penny. Then Luke says, Jesus is a messenger, follow messenger, not church. And again, if you're going to listen to Jesus' message, then you need to go to church. You know, Jesus went to church. Even though the church time had its problems, he went. So there's that. I do think that to suggest that not going to church is okay is absolutely... Dang, I do my neighbor's front lawn whenever I cut mine for free. That's nice of you, Stan. Yeah, I wish I had you as my next door neighbor then. Because if someone was mowing our front lawn, I'd probably just let the back lawn grow until I can afford a better mower. But yeah. And Miss Money Petty gives a thumbs up, and I'm actually caught up, which is amazing. But then we're still early in the stream. We'll see how it goes in a minute. Only 5 of us here right now. So, yeah, just kind of looking back at what Loopy was saying, I think that there are a lot of people out there that suggest that they're spiritual, but they're not religious, or, they follow Jesus, but not the church, and that kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, I have criticized the church, capital C, as well as lowercase c churches, a lot on this channel, and I will probably continue to do so. Christians tend to be hypocritical, they tend to be judgmental, they do a lot of bad things. However, we need that community. That's why, as the Bible so aptly puts, iron sharpens iron. We need the community that comes only from church. Now, if you happen to be attending a church that is teaching things that are anti-biblical, such as certain things that come out of the Catholic or Orthodox Church or the Jehovah's Witnesses, stuff like that, then yeah, you need to find another church. You need to find, but to just say, oh, I've had some bad experiences with churches, so I'm not going to church, and instead I'm just going to follow Jesus. Well, you're not following Jesus if you're not at least attempting to go to some kind of church. Now, if you're disabled or there's no churches near you, that can be different. But even then, in the modern era, find an online church home. So I think that there's really no excuse. Let's see. Saw some Superman reviews discussing all the different symbolic representations, like Zack Snyder tried to make him sort of a Jesus figure. Well, Superman was originally not a Jesus figure, but a messianic figure. He was the whole idea. Remember, Jesus was created by a couple of Jewish guys that were basically creating their vision of what the Savior would be. And notice the parallels from the Old Testament with Superman. He's basically Moses from another planet, right? He is put in a small ark, sent along the rivers of the cosmos, where he washes up on the shores of Kansas and is granted incredible abilities, from the source of all light, the sun. There's a lot of symbolism as far as Jesus, Superman being a savior character, a messiah. And that's actually kind of the point. Like, Superman comes to Earth, and his whole purpose of being on Earth is to save us from ourselves. And then Stan goes on, he's actually more of a Moses figure. Well, he's not a Jesus specific figure. Zack Snyder made him more of a Jesus kind of figure because Zack Snyder is I don't know if he's a Christian, but at least he understands the influence of Christianity. Whereas if you were an actual practicing Jew, you would not. And yeah, so then he's kind of reiterating exactly what I was just saying. Send a basket on the river to raise by another culture. I'm not sure the new movie. Now, the new movie really didn't get deep into any of. Well, the only thing it kind of did was it kind of threw it on its head a little bit, and it's been controversial to some, as far as the message from Jor-El that from Krypton or Krypton or however you say it. I kind of like Krypton, even though I know that was just Marlon Brando not pronouncing it correctly. I like it, but if you look at the message, right? So in and me and Mr. Know-It-All talked about this on Friday. I think that what would be smart is if they, in a future movie, have the super robots like work on actually looking at the Kryptonian language and realizing that while they kind of, it's a legitimate message that Luther uncovered, but there's some mistranslation going on. Kind of like when we look at the Bible in many cases. We see the word slave in the Bible, and we immediately think of things like the slavery of America from 200 years ago, when in actuality, the word slave was more akin to servant. And the funny thing is that you have some translations of the Bible that will use the word slave and use the word servant throughout the text, even though they're translating it from the same word, and it can be very confusing. And so, while slave, and the other thing is that slave wouldn't even be really considered accurate if you look at, especially like after our recent exploration of Exodus, the duties that you have to your slaves, because these kinds of duties do not apply to true chattel slavery like we had in the United States. And so like for example, in the United States, if you were to kill a slave, you are not guilty of a crime any more than you'd be guilty of a crime for destroying any of your personal property. The But in Exodus, it makes it very clear that someone who kills their slave is guilty of murder. So that's a serious problem. So it's definitely not the same. But what if some of the language from Jor-El's message was similarly misunderstood, and so where they translated it to mean that he was to rule over Earth, perhaps it meant that he was to be called to a higher purpose to help mankind. And that's, I think, could be interesting. And one thing Mr. Know-It-All said, and I kind of agree, is it would also be from a pragmatic sense, it would make a lot of sense to encourage him to have lots of children, because he is the only person who has Kryptonian DNA. And honestly, and let's be real, if Superman actually existed, if they're just like he is in the movies and stuff, Superman's flying around doing his thing, and he decided to start donating his sperm to a sperm bank. Women would line up, and men would, and husbands would encourage them, would line up to get some of that Kryptonian DNA, because they absolutely would want to have the next super baby. So if James Gunn intentionally avoid, I don't know if he. I don't think that. I would say this. I think James Gunn was just trying to catch the spirit of the comic book, which I think he did successfully. I don't think that he was really trying to delve deep into the philosophy of Superman. Played by Bradley Cooper. Gunn's definitely loyal actors. This is nothing new to James Gunn. You will find that if you start searching Hollywood, you'll see certain directors or certain producers, you'll see the same actors pop up over and over and over again. Cooper isn't Guardian, so is Nathan Fillion, John Gunn, probably others. Yes. But, as far as Nathan Fillion, I'm sorry. That was probably some of the best casting in a superhero movie that I can think of in the last several years, at least. Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner specifically. He would not have made a good Hal Jordan, but he was a perfect Guy Gardner. I would watch a Guy Gardner movie. I would watch a Justice Gang movie. I would, just for Guy Gardner. I absolutely want more Guy Gardner in this DC universe. He started donating his sperm. The first thing I hear when I get here. Oh, Lord. Good to see you, Mr. Miles. Hope you are well. And yes, if Superman were donating his sperm, I think people would line up around the block to get it. I absolutely believe that. And I don't think there's any question. Because as it is, many sperm banks, they'll keep a bio profile of the donor. And so people will look at, not just physical traits like, race, height, eye color, hair color, but, IQ and stuff like that. And Superman is basically off the charts with pretty much everything, except he's basically average intelligence. But, everything else, he's perfect. It looks like Guy Gardner will show up in the new Peacemaker season. Yeah, I've heard that, which, I'm not a fan of Peacemaker. Mr. Know-It-All keeps trying to make me go, watch the series. I probably will eventually. But, I'm more looking forward to Strange New Worlds Season 3. Would you milk him to get the sperm? You should have to earn it. I'm not going to do it. I'm sure you could get a whole lot of volunteers that would, but I would not be among them. You're more than welcome to. Otherwise, I would say just leave that job to intrepid reporter Lois Lane. Yeah, went there. Yeah, so anything that doesn't have to do with Superman's sperm, I would prefer on this church life stream. It would be nice to not be talking about Superman's seed. Uh, are you keeping the next Bible study book a secret? Not particularly, but I just haven't said it. But it's not like, ooh, it's a secret. Yeah. And Mr. Brown says, life has been strange for me. Well, that could mean a lot of things, Mr. Miles. That could be a good thing or a bad thing or an indifferent thing. So I don't know what to say to that, except I hope that your strangeness is interesting. And Mr. Miles says, what's wrong with super sperm in a church student? Doesn't the Bible say to be fruitful and multiply? Well, yes, but the Bible doesn't talk about donating sperm to a facility that can distribute said sperm to make other people pregnant. Fruitful and multiply was something to be kept in the context of marriage, which I know is silly and old-fashioned and boring. But, hey. And Miss Moneypenny saying hi to Mr. Miles, because Miss Moneypenny cannot let anybody coming in without throwing a wrench at their head for some reason. She's so mean. You know, everybody's got like massive concussions and stuff as they're walking the door, and Miss Moneypenny's just sitting there. If you dodge a ball, you dodge a wrench. You know, and hits them in the face. And Miss Miles says, strange bad, by the way. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. In that case, I hope that the strangeness goes away. Anything particularly you want to share, or you just want to just say it was strange? Robert is in the house, says hello there today, Salty Trigger, as opposed to hello there yesterday or hello there tomorrow. So with the pay cuts, I heard that was coming to Uber and Lyft drivers. Are you going to keep doing Uber? I don't really have much choice, to be honest, Robert. There's not much else I can do unless I can get the YouTube channel making one. I haven't heard about Uber pay cuts. Is that true? Let's see. Let's see. Reports indicate that Uber has been cutting driver pay in various ways, including reducing the base rates. Well, that's been going on forever. A larger cut of fares is will decrease earnings for drivers, especially with rising costs of car ownership operation. While Uber argues these changes have led to increased rider demand and more trips for drivers, many drivers are experiencing significant financial strain. So it's not like they're doing something like lowering the fares. That would be devastating. And just, they do, it's kind of weird the way that Uber works, because if you pay $5 for a ride, depending on the time of day and where you are located and where the driver is located and a bunch of other random factors, and I do think that there's also some like personal preference, if you will, by the algorithm as far as like good drivers versus bad drivers in their mind. Good drivers being people that do everything they want them to, as opposed to bad drivers, people that are selective with their acceptance of rides. And all those factors come together, and so you pay $5 for the ride. I might get $4.50. I might get $3.50. I might get $3. It just depends on all those factors. And the thing that's very frustrating as an Uber driver is that you have no way of knowing what those factors are. It's almost like how the YouTube terms of service work, where the YouTube terms of service will say if you violate the YouTube terms of service that you can get in trouble, but the YouTube terms of service are so unclear and vague that you have no idea if you violated the YouTube terms of service. Mr. Miles says, it's relationship stuff. Has a lot of dynamics, would take a while to explain it. Relationships can definitely be messy. That is 100% for sure. In fact, last night while driving Uber, I had a nice 40-something-year-old lady who I picked up from a party with some friends of hers, and I was taking her home, and she was absolutely in tears because of her relationship. But, when we were talking, it's like, it's so funny because relationships are so simple, and yet we make them so complicated. And like when just talking to her, getting her to say, talk about what's going on, it became painfully obvious what the problem was. Is that she said, oh, everything in her life was just chaotic and too busy, and she had too many things going on and stuff. And, she wanted more attention from her boyfriend, who they've been living together for like 8 years, and he hasn't put a ring on it. And I'm like, well, you need to do something about that. But when talking about the core of their, I would say, marital problems, even though they're not married, and the problem is, as far as them not being married, is that it's one of those situations where both of them are divorcees, and he, has a bad feeling about marriage now that he's divorced. I'm assuming he lost a lot of stuff in the last divorce, but. She was talking about how she has all this stuff she has to do. She has to take care of the dog, and she has to, wash the dishes or do whatever. She has all this stuff she has to do. It's just chaotic. And so, and the problem is that he goes to bed at like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. She doesn't go to bed until after midnight. And I'm like, well, what are you doing between 8 o'clock and midnight? And then she starts listing all this stuff. And I said, is there anything in this list that you can't do at 8 o'clock in the morning instead of 8 o'clock at night? And I said, so, you want attention from him, but you're leaving him alone in bed every night for like, 4 hours. He's out. He's asleep by the time you come to bed. And, as a guy, he wants to know you're there with him. I'm not just talking about sex. I'm just talking about, you want that companionship, that closeness, that intimacy of just being with the other person. And so I said, you know what? Anything that you could do in the morning instead of night, just get up earlier and do it instead of going to bed late. And, so you need to make a point of the two of you, going to bed together. If you're going to be a married couple, then you should try to do that if at all possible. Let's see. And Stanley was asking if they're lowering wages or increasing taxes, and Robert said, no, taxes, as far as the taxes and stuff, they're fairly transparent on that stuff as far as how that works. And yeah, but the funny thing is, those are kind of the same thing, because if, for example, the government says that Uber has to pay some new fee, then Uber, of course, takes that out of my cut, right? It's just like when people think that, oh, tariffs are going to, just the other person's going to pay the tariff. You really think the business isn't going to charge you extra to cover the cost of the tariff? No. That's if it's at all possible, you pass it along. And same thing with Uber. So if Uber has to pay anything extra, then that means that the driver gets less. The only thing that Uber can't take anything from is the tips. And so that's why I do always encourage people, not just because it's beneficial to myself, but because it's just the right thing to do. Always tip your Uber driver. Always. You don't know how much they're getting paid, but it ain't what you paid for the ride. Kermit in the house. Haven't talked to you in a little while. Kermit says, did you see they released an ad for Afghanistan tourism? I don't know if they have tourism in infrastructure, to be honest, yet. It was on Twitter. I have not, and I don't really plan on going to Afghanistan, so it doesn't really affect me. Out of all my friends, only one has managed to stay in a long-term marriage. Well, that's not true. I'm in a long-term marriage. We're friends, right? 32 years now. And at least what? I don't know if you're watching, babe, but what would you say? 32 years, 8, 9 good ones? That was a joke. One friend has 2 ex-wives and a kid with each of them. But you know what? Divorce. Look, I'm going to be real for a second. If you are a Christian, even though, and I know this isn't the case, but I'm talking about if you are living a Christian lifestyle in the way that the Bible prescribes, divorce shouldn't even be on the table. It shouldn't even be a thing for the most part. Like it used to be, like if you look at the Old Testament, they would say, okay, you can do a certificate of divorce for this and this and this and this and this, blah, blah, blah. And then Jesus came down and said, oh, no, 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 no. Divorce ain't okay. And even then he gave a little bit and said, okay, if there's infidelity, you can get divorced. But it doesn't mean you should get divorced. It means you can get divorced. And this is something that Christians, in fact, just people in the Western world, they don't take marriage seriously anymore. That's why so many people just shack up because they don't, what's marriage? It's just a piece of paper. It doesn't mean anything, and it's like, no, it does mean something. It's a commitment between 2 people that they are going to take care of each other, watch over each other, and be responsible for each other until one of them is dead. And that sounds morbid, but it's actually kind of beautiful. And the problem is that we've taken it and we've just turned it into friends with benefits. Mr. Miles says, yeah, I remember dealing with YouTube terms of service like navigating minefield without a map or a detector. Yeah, it's crazy. And in fact, some of the things in the YouTube terms of service are impossible to define. It will say things like, you cannot post controversial or offensive content. Well, that could be anything. That literally could be anything. Because if I post a video where I'm just talking about how I think that stormtrooper helmets suck, then some Star Wars fanboy might be offended about that. Right? Or, or the Star Wars fan community might find that controversial and so strike it for violation of terms of service. If I want to say the world is round, well, the flat earth community could scream that that's offensive and controversial, and so you need to have a much more specific terms of service. And honestly, I think that YouTube should be treated more like a platform than a publisher. And if so, then that means that they should have much broader terms. For example, you can post anything you want as long as it is not illegal. And if you want to say things like specific hate speech is not allowed, but then you need to define what hate speech is. So, for example, me saying I'm a Christian and as such I believe that homosexuality is a sin, that's not hate speech. Hate speech would be saying something like, all those F's need to die, that kind of thing. Which there are people out there that say that kind of crap, right? That's hate speech. Hate speech isn't, hey, I disagree with you. Hate speech is, I hate you. Another one ended up getting divorced when his wife couldn't get her alcoholism under control. You see, there's and the way you phrase that, and I know that you may not have done that intent, but that's actually an interesting thing. The way his wife couldn't get her alcoholism out of control. So, like, he had nothing to do with the divorce. It was just because of her alcoholism. Well, no, you still chose to give up on her if he initiated the divorce. And granted, living with an alcoholic is a very difficult thing for sure. but and maybe it takes, a lot of intervention, and a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and a lot of tears. But that's what marriage is all about. And the problem is we don't take the commitment seriously. Don't get me wrong, I'm not dissing your friend, but at the same time, we will do things like divorce because the other person won't fix themselves in some way that we think they need to. Whether and alcoholism is a very dramatic example, but there are lots of others. People get divorced because they one of the partners becomes fat, or because they think they're too lazy, or because they argue a lot over money or whatever it is. Those are not reasons to get divorced. Now, they could be reasons to get counseling, but they're certainly not reasons to get divorced. And Loopy is back saying Jesus is a messenger. Okay. Like I said, Jesus is a lot more than that. Let's see. Stanley says, worst part is his son might have some minor issues when we're drinking during pregnancy. That sucks. One wants to know what's the message. And the message is not to worship any other God than the one true God. Well, okay, so, Loopy, have you read the Bible, or are you just, like, throwing out stuff that you think sounds good? Because if you think that's Jesus' message, it is part of it. I mean, in fact, the funny thing is that it's part of the greatest commandment, but that's not the whole thing. Yeah, I always laugh about people who brag about being more productive because they wake up at like 5 a.m. But if they're getting healthy sleep, then it just means they're going to bed at like 9. Yeah, but you know what? I think that there's something to be said for Ben Franklin's old saying, early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. I do think that you're more productive if you go to bed at an earlier hour, get up early, and attack problems fresh and with plenty of time at the beginning of the day, as opposed to trying to get things done before you go to bed. Mr. Miles says, always tip your Uber driver and your YouTube host. Well, tipping your YouTube host should go without saying, but, you said it. What's the difference from going to bed at 11 p.m. and waking? What's the difference from going to bed at 11 p.m. waking up at 7 a.m.? It's not the difference of the time as much as the activity. Because, like, if you're spending the end of your day trying to, basically the way your day should go, if you look at from just not just a biblical standpoint, but just the way that we're wired and everything, we are more productive in the earlier part of the day than we are in the latter part of the day. And so it's better for us to get the work done in the morning, or at least whenever it is we get up, because we could be sleeping all day, and that means if we get up at 7 p.m., that's the time to get work done. And then those last few hours before bed should be relaxation time, right? That should be the time that you, quote unquote, unwind. If you're doing work right up till going to bed, you're not being as productive as you could. It would be smarter to just go to bed and do the work in the morning when your brain is refreshed and your body is ready. Indie Tiger, the absolute best tiger to not currently be on a cereal box. However, we're still working on that. Says, hello all, hello Salty, good to see you. And says, still not on a cereal box. I know. I got to get that cereal box made, I'm telling you. And say, are you suggesting churches aren't? Yeah, I don't know what Loopy's trying to do. The problem with people like Loopy, And I'm sorry, Loopy, if you're listening, I hope you'll answer this because it's really kind of frustrating. The problem with people like Loopy is that they sit there and they'll spam out some message like, oh, yeah, Jesus is a messenger, Jesus is a messenger, Jesus is a messenger. But they're not talking about it. They're just spamming the message, even though that's not what we're talking about right now. And even when I do try to address what they say and say, okay, let's make that a topic of discussion, they have nothing to say because it's hollow and empty. It's just rhetoric. And to me, that's one of the reasons I don't like most politicians, is because rhetoric is usually destructive. And Stanley says, well, you're still great. Actually, Indie Tiger is good. You got to watch the copyright infringement. Captain Phantom Nerd in the house says, hello, how you doing? Stanley says, well, they'd be right because Stormtrooper helmets are objectively awesome. Well, except that they're not, because if you consider, okay, so Stormtrooper helmets may look cool. I won't deny that. Heck, that's why I made that one. But if you can drop a rock on a Stormtrooper's head and it kills them, that's not a very good helmet, because I'll tell you, if I had a good motorcycle helmet on and those Ewoks dropped those rocks on me, they just bounce off the helmet and I'd be like, huh, what was that? Stan says, was just watching an X video about how the rich Uber Eats customers are far less likely to... Oh, yeah. I will tell you, wealthy people don't tip, generally speaking. I get my best tips... Okay, so this sounds horrible, but it's true. I get my best tips from older women because they love my hair. And get good tips from people who love music. Because one thing that I'll do very commonly is if I don't have anything to talk about with the person, I'll say, hey, what's your favorite song of all time? And whatever they say, unless it's in a language that I can't pronounce, whatever they say, I then immediately, because I have YouTube Music plugged into my stereo, I just hit the little button on my steering wheel and I say, okay, play this song, and put it on for them. And, and that immediately puts people in a good mood, right? They hear their favorite song while they're cruising and all that. So that usually works well. I get really good tips from poor people in general, as long as they speak English. I get no tips from people that don't speak English. And I don't necessarily think it's because, those Mexicans are mean people or something. I think it's because it's a cultural difference, because many cultures don't tip like we do. And many people don't understand that Uber drivers need tips in order to make a decent living. So, and my tips are definitely above average as far as for Uber, but it's still hit and miss, because I hate it when I go to, like, there's a city here in Tennessee called Franklin. I try to avoid going to Franklin at all costs, because Franklin is almost nothing but rich people. And so, you go to Franklin, you might get, plenty of rides, but you're not going to get any tips. On the other hand, you drive in like a middle class area like Murfreesboro or Smyrna, you do all right with the tips. You get better tips in lower income communities like Manchester, Woodbury, Shelbyville, but those towns are so small that it's hard to get enough rides to justify it. Mr. Morrow says, anything can be defined as hate speech. That's why hate speech is a protected right. Founding fathers would have been accused of hate speech for rebelling against the crown. Oh, well, don't get me wrong. That's why I say, if you're going to have some kind of ban against hate speech, you have to be specific about it. You have to give very specific examples, because it is not hate speech to simply disagree, even though some people think it is. But it might be, if you want to say that hate speech, for example, might be using racial slurs in a attack method. So if I were to say, you're just a dirty, throw in a racial slur in there, that could be construed as hate speech. And I wouldn't have a problem if that was in their terms of service. But to just say, no hate speech, it's like, well, then tell me what hate speech is. Because if hate speech is just disagreeing, then you need to, and this is honestly the reason, since you mentioned this, Mr. Miles, the reason that they're so vague is simple. That way they can enforce the rules however they feel, and they don't get in trouble for not enforcing the rules against people that do the same thing. So if they say, for example, hate speech is simply disagreeing or suggesting that homosexuality is a sin is hate speech, right? So then, because I said it, because, say I was doing my Bible study and we get to a spot where it says that, and I read it, and well, that's what it says, that, they flag me as being hate speech, and they run me off of YouTube, blah, 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 blah. But they also have, plenty of YouTube channels that are Christian-based channels that make them a lot of money because they have hundreds of thousands of subscribers and blah, blah, blah. And so they'll let that slide if they talk about it. And the way they can do that is by not defining what hate speech is, and just by saying, yeah, you committed hate speech. But and the thing that really makes me mad is that, like, I had a whole battle with YouTube a few years ago where they would say, this video violates our terms of service, and I would reach out to them and say, how does it violate terms of service? And then they would come back with, it violates the terms of service about, like controversial or offensive or hate speech. It's like, well, wait, first of all, which is it? And second of all, what specifically about the video is it? And they'll just repeat, well, it violates this policy. And they won't say specifically what you did ever. And the reason they don't is simple. They want to avoid a lawsuit. If they don't tell you the specific reason why your video was flagged or taken down or whatever, outside of copyright, if they don't tell you, then you can't accuse them of discriminating against you. So, for example, if they want to take down my video because I have long gray hair, but then I complain because there's other YouTubers with long gray hair, I got a lawsuit. However, if they just say, you violate our appearance policy, and I say, well, how? Well, you violate our appearance policy. And that's all they ever say. Now I don't have as strong a grounds. And if I was to try to take them to court, they say, oh, that has nothing to do with his hair. It was about his stormtrooper helmet, because, or something like that. In places like Taiwan, I think it's illegal to say anything negative about their royalty. Well, heck, in Canada, it's illegal to misgender someone. What was her response? Oh, as far as the lady that was in the car, she told me that she was going, she was actually, like I said, she was crying about it, and we talked for a minute, and she sounded very receptive of what I said, and she's going to try to do that. And I said, well, if you ever get me as an Uber driver again, you have to tell me if it worked. The early watches were always my favorite because the world's quieter in the beginning of the day. That's true, too. And Robert's saying hello to Indy. Mr. Miles says, what if they say their favorite song is WAP? I'd put it on. Look, I'm a big boy, and I've been in the Army, and I've been around the world. Well, not literally, but figuratively. Nothing's going to offend me. I've heard that song. I know it's disgusting. But if somebody else wants to listen to it, fine, whatever. If it puts them in a good mood, I'm not going to judge. And that's the wife reminding me we have 25 minutes. Thank you, dear. Let's see. Youngster says, so if I ever rode in a car and I want to listen to ICP, I can in your car while using Uber? Absolutely. If anybody, and I've only had it happen a couple of times, but if anybody comes into the car and they hear a song playing that they don't care for, and they say, hey, can you put on whatever they ask? I'm like, yeah, I'm perfectly fine with it. Because to me, it's just listening to different tastes and trying to understand where they're coming from. And sometimes if it's something weird like WAP, I might ask them, why do you like the song? Just to start a conversation. I've never had anybody actually request WAP, but, that's But that would be a great way to start a conversation, is listening to the song for a little bit, and then turn the volume down a little and say, so tell me, what is it about this song that you really like? And no, I'm definitely not a juggalo. If somebody wants to hire Uber to drive from Tennessee to Oakland, California, that is realistically what is that realistically what a big tip you want out of that this real? Well, you can't take an Uber that far. The furthest you could take Uber from Tennessee would be like Atlanta, Kentucky, maybe Illinois, but the absolute limit is an 8-hour drive. So that you can't take an Uber from Tennessee to Oakland. And that is actually true, Stan. When I've only had it happen a couple of times, but like I had a guy wanting me to take him. It's kind of funny because if you're in the app, you can add a stop to your ride while you're in the car, and there's not much I can do to stop it. But I had a guy add a stop, like we were just driving across Murfreesboro, and then he added a stop in Alabama, which is it was like a 3-hour drive, right? And I looked at him. I said, "Sir, look, that I can't do." I said, because you're going to take me 3 hours out of this town, and then I have to drive 3 hours to get back, and I'm not going to be able to get a fare coming back unless there's a miracle, right? And so at that point, he said, "Well, here's what the fare is going down. I will double it for you." And he gave me cash up front, and I was like, okay. And by the way, I never accept promises of a tip, because every single time, and I mean every single time, somebody promises a tip, they do not tip. That's the best way to know someone's not going to tip, is if they say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to give you a good tip," then they don't tip you. I hate hearing that out of people. And sometimes I'll even tell them, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to tip." I said, "Don't promise me a tip, because I know you're not going to give it to me." There's some space coming on inner chat. I hate liver and onions. That's the most gross food. I hate peaches and mangoes. They're gross. Well, I'll agree with you on the first part. Livers and onions are disgusting. Did you ever see the streaming series about the founding of Uber? I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt played the guy who started. No, I'm not. And Stanley wondering how you can hate peaches. Good question. Israel will rise again. Praise Jesus, says Major. As far as I know, Israel is up and running right now. Those are peaches that are so juicy that you have to eat them while standing over the sink or outdoors. Oh, yeah. Who really believes that there was no Epstein client list? The Epstein unalived himself. I don't. Well, no, I think it's funny that Trump was all, yeah, we're going to release the list. We're going to release. No, there's no list. What are you talking about? Nowadays, with people like Ben Shapiro, if you don't agree with and support everything Israel does, you can get accused of being anti-Semitic. Well, I think that's one of the reasons that I don't like rhetoric. Ben Shapiro is very good at it. But yeah, don't get me wrong. If you disagree with Israel's policies, like say the way that Israel's handling the Palestinian situation, or the way that they're handling the Iranian situation, or whatever, if you disagree with that, fine. I don't have a problem. Just like if you agree with or disagree with President Trump, or you agree with or disagree with President Biden or whatever, fine. I have no problem with honest disagreement, but I do not like when people are just throwing this rhetoric around, like, oh, well, if you disagree with me, then you're evil, And Ben Shapiro is, like I said, he's a very effective debater, and in some things I think that he's very, very right. But yes, he does get a little bit over the top with anti-Semitism sometimes. And it's kind of funny, because Ben Shapiro will go out there preaching the gospel of everybody is an anti-Semite, while at the same time denying the existence of racism. Go figure. Which, by the way, anti-Semitism is racism. Hypothetically, if someone entered your Uber, and they want to listen to the latest Doomcock video, what do you? I would say, well, I can't play video, because that would not be okay. You're not allowed to watch video while driving. Now, if they whip out their own phone and they're watching Doomcock while I'm driving, I don't care. People do, it's really annoying sometimes because if somebody says, "Hey, can you turn down the music because I want to do whatever on the phone?" I'm fine with that. I will absolutely. I'll stop the music, let them play whatever they're doing on the phone. Like a lot of people scroll through TikTok when musical videos there and stuff. But what I find really annoying is that if the music is playing and then they turn on their phone, they start scrolling through TikTok or whatever, and so then they just crank up the volume on the phone to try and drown out the music playing. And then I'll usually just stop the music anyway, but I just find that rude. And just say something. Rose says, I always threaten the kid with liver and onions when I ask him what we should have for supper, and he tells me, yeah, my dad loved liver and onions. Disgusting. Let's see. The worst is their reasoning if the list released could affect a lot of very wealthy, powerful people. Well, yeah, and we know that, like, for example, some things are obvious. Like, it's so funny because, like, when Elon Musk said, Trump is on the list, well, duh. I mean, there's only like 800 pictures of Trump and Bill Clinton and Epstein palling around. I mean, Trump being on the list is like, and water is wet. So what? But the thing is if you're a Trump supporter, you either don't care, or even if he is on the list, you'll come up with some rationalization for why he didn't actually do any of the nasty stuff on Epstein Island while everybody else did. And Robert's agreeing that it's horrible about the reasoning. Has Doomcock ever done a face reveal? Not to my understanding. And I think that's smart. Because if I knew what his face looked like and I saw it, I'd want to punch him in it sometimes. Thoughts? Let's see. Don't think. Have you pre-ordered Radek's new book? No, I didn't know that he actually wrote about it. I don't watch his channel that often anymore because I just find it's so repetitive. He just says the same thing over and over and over, just in slightly different ways, and maybe sometimes about different subjects, And I'm tired of it. I don't care about the fact that you think there are too many strong Mary Sues in Hollywood. I don't care about the fact that, you think that it's terrible to race swap characters that have no significance as to their race. I don't care. I really don't. I don't want to. And, here's the funny thing is Nerdrotic, and I didn't get a chance to get into this during our Superman review, so I'll say it now. This is where Nerdrotic was a straight-up idiot with his Superman review, because, he was talking about how horrible the movie was, but he was saying, but it's not woke. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is a perfect opportunity for you to target for wokeness. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that Superman was woke, me personally. But if I was a Nerdrotic, or whoever writes for Nerdrotic, if he doesn't write his own material anymore, I don't know. But if I was the person writing the next Nerdrotic review about Superman, I would be going off on the fact that Perry White is still black, like he was in in the Man of Steel movies. And how that's just wokeness at its worst. And hey, they bring in Hawk Girl, but where's Hawkman? Hey, and he even mentions, like, one of the things he doesn't like is Superman gets his butt kicked all the time. And it's like, well, yeah, it's Superman. All the men are either incompetent or jerks or whatever, but the women are all awesome, right? I'm surprised he didn't go that angle. I really am, and I don't understand why he didn't. Except that I think he knows that he's kicking a dead horse at that point. Girls, let's see. Mr. Mouse says, "Why would you want to punch Doomcock? Last I heard, you were a member. You even had one of his certificates. I was one of his first members. I still have the card around here somewhere, but I've discontinued my membership with him. And kind of the same thing as, first of all, he's a skipping record, saying the same thing over and over and over. He needs some new material, and even when something is good, I'll tell you, the worst thing that Doomcock ever said, and what really made me say, no more am I going to support this guy, was a few years back when Picard was coming out. And granted, I'm not a big fan of Picard, as most of you know, even season 3. And actually, I think it was right when season 3 came out. And Doomcock was saying that this was before anybody had actually seen it, but some people had seen like the first few episodes as like a preview, and people like Nerdrotic and others were saying, wow, this is actually good, right? It looks like season 3 Picard, they finally got it right. They're getting the crew back together, they're doing all the right stuff, and they got all this great things going on in season 3. And Doomcock's response to that was, he said, basically, yeah, I'm not going to watch season 3. I'm not going to watch the first 3 episodes. I'm not going to watch the last 6 episodes. I'm not going to watch it at all, because even if it's good, we should hate it because it was made by Alex Kurtzman. He said that. And I was like, oh, so you don't care about the quality of Star Trek. You just care about whose name is on the executive producer side. Well, and the funny thing is, because I've talked to Doomcock, on his live streams a few times and offline a few times, and I know how well he knows the history of Star Trek, the behind-the-scenes stuff, and he knows full well the truth about Gene Roddenberry and the fact that Gene Roddenberry didn't have some grand vision, and Gene Roddenberry was just kind of a jerk who was trying to get women and money. That's all he cared about, right? That's why he's, the only woman to get fired in the original series was the one who wouldn't sleep with him, and that's Grace Lee Whitney. Where am I? But he knew all this. Of course he did. He knew that Gene Kuhn and DC Fontana were the real brains behind Star Trek. He knew that the reason that Star Trek was made at all was because of Lucille Ball. He knew all this stuff. But he will go on his channel and talk about the grand vision of Gene Roddenberry and how Gene Roddenberry would be offended by things like Star Trek Discovery, when he wouldn't. Gene Roddenberry would be fine with Star Trek Discovery as long as it made money. He doesn't care about that. But so, Doomcock to me is, he's as shallow as his cheap mask. I'm sorry. I really like the guy. And I tried to help him when he was a small channel, and I was a medium-sized channel. And then, he obviously grew way beyond me, which is great. I'm happy for his success. But at the same time, he made a success by selling his soul to the hate machine. And I don't care about that. George Reeves Superman TV show is okay, but Indy Tiger with a $20 super chat. Oh my goodness, thank you so much, buddy. And so I'll come back to you just a second, Robert, because money talks. I didn't realize that Bruce went into so much detail about his backstory in the show. Says watching Adam West Batman earlier today, I didn't realize that Bruce went into so much detail about his backstory in the show, talking about his dad's law books, his parents' death, his lifelong mission. Oh yeah. I mean, the funny thing about the 1960s Batman television series is, I would say that in its day, it was completely comic book accurate as far as, yes, comic books in the 60s were silly and bonkers and just, exactly like, running around with a giant bomb saying some days you can't get rid of a bomb. Yeah. Just like in the Superman movies, Lex Luthor having a pocket dimension in which he keeps hundreds of monkeys with modified brains to troll Superman online is absolutely something that Lex Luthor would do. They were just being comic book accurate, and I'm okay with that. You need to stop worrying about, oh, it's not realistic unless, everybody's crying and sad. Shut up, it's a comic book. Make it a comic book. But yes, and so they pulled from the source material a lot in that series. They invented a few things too, like some of the villains, like King Tut, I believe, was invented by, was it King Tut, or was it, there was a couple of villains that were invented for the series. But at the same time, most of the villains on the series were pulled from the comic books. The way that Batman, because it was like Batman would go, try to figure out what to do, and he'd just go to the Bat computer, and the Bat computer would tell him what to do. It's right out of the stick comic books. And so, yeah, it was a very comic book accurate show. Now, that being said, I think The Batman, the one with the Robert Pattinson that came out just a couple of years ago, was also a comic book accurate Batman for the most part, except that I don't think they got Bruce Wayne quite right. But the difference is that the comics are much darker now than they were in the 60s. Now, personally, I think comics were at their peak in the 70s and early 80s. And that's what the first couple of phases of the MCU felt like. And that's very much like what the Superman movie feels like to me. In fact, Guy Gardner, I think, came on the scene in the early 80s, if I remember correctly. All right, so back to it. The George Reeves Superman TV show is okay, but but he never found any supervillains, and no Lex Luthor either, just regular bad. That was the same problem, honestly, with the Christopher Reeves Superman the movie in 1978. And while they tried to rectify that with Superman 2 with Zod and his gang, the special effects were so bad that the fight was underwhelming. And so, I'm sorry, but seeing Superman being able to cut loose with modern visual effects is freaking awesome. Seeing Superman fighting a kaiju was awesome. And I think Jimmy Olsen was even a ginger. That is correct. Mr. Miles says, I still pop him to do kind of streams every blue moon. All I hear is him doing voices, making dad jokes, singing, reading, chat, and drinking. Well, his live streams are very different than his edited videos. Yeah, his live streams, he just basically goofs around. And that's exactly what he's always done. But his edited videos, he's always just ranting and raving about the same thing every time, just like Nerdrotic. The difference with Nerdrotic is his live streams and his edited videos are almost indistinguishable. Let's see. He also recently reposted his first ever video, which was a vicious takedown of Star Trek Discovery. Well, yeah, and I was with him on that. That's when we were friends. Well, Batman didn't really get gritty until Dark Knight Returns, right? Batman had his ups and downs as far as grittiness level. Like in the 70s and 80s, he was much darker than he was in the 60s. Like he was more, I would say he was like the tone of a Christopher Nolan film in Batman's peak. Like if you look at Batman with the Adams runs and stuff like that, I think that's where Batman was absolutely peak. But yeah, then he got really dark in 1986 with The Dark Knight Returns. And that's why the wife's saying, you better get off the stream right now. So I'm going to wrap it up after these next couple of comments. So don't bother commenting now because I don't have time. Stanley says that wasn't until the late 80s. Yeah, it's 1986 that Dark Knight Return came out. Same year that Marvel published Secret Wars and The Watchmen. It was a banner year for comics, but not in a good way. Youngster says, I think some of the Phantom Menace is getting paid by the studio to make good comment ball movie. I think some of the Phantom Menace are getting paid by the studio to make good comment ball movie, like AKA Superman. I don't know what you're talking about because most of the Phantom Menace hates Superman. So I don't know what you're talking about. And then finally, this is the last comment. No matter what, Trek Yards won't pay attention to your chats unless you super chat a certain amount, unfortunately. Some channels do that. I haven't been on Trek Yards in a while, unfortunately, just because I haven't been on YouTube in a while because of my Uber's been taking up all my time. But If that's true, if I strongly disagree with that practice. I think that comments should be read, especially like if you have a busy comment section, then you need a comment moderator that's feeding you comments, while you're talking, so that you don't have to read them all as they come through. But you should read a comment based on its merits, not based on its monetary value. That being said, I do think that you should read all the super chats because people were kind enough to pay you, unless the super chat is saying something you can't say. And Indy Tiger says, George, I had to read because it's Indy Tiger bribed me already. George P. Superman was very condescending. Clark always knows more than anyone, including one episode where two pro photographers don't know as much about photography as he does. I didn't watch the George Reeves show a lot. I just clips of it. Because I always found, when I tried to watch it, I always found it boring because there were no supervillains. So I don't know. I know that the George Reeves Clark didn't seem like Clark because he didn't seem clumsy or awkward or anything like that. I think that's where Reeve nailed Clark Kent. And that was probably the weakest part of the new Superman movies. We didn't really get much Clark Kent, so it was hard to really gauge his character. And John Lovell, because I just saw this, so I had to read it. Christians deny reality to make sense of the world. Actually, you have that backwards, my friends. Atheists deny reality in order to come up with a world that doesn't have a God. And in fact, if you look at modern liberal secular culture, it's all about denying reality. I mean, look, I know YouTube may cancel me because this is controversial, but a man who wears a dress is not a woman. It's a man who wears a dress. However, we have now a scientific community of psychiatrists and psychologists that are trying to say, oh, no, you really are whatever you think you are. Whatever your thoughts are define reality. That's a bunch of BS, right? The universe cannot exist without a creator. However, what we try to do is say, oh, no, the laws themselves created the universe. That's what, what's his name said in the, I can't remember his name now, but I read his book on it, which is a bunch of crap because the laws can't do anything. 2 + 2 = 4, but mathematics doesn't give me money. Work does. So, I understand that people hate the idea that God may exist. But, stop trying to say Christians deny reality just because you don't want to face actual cold, hard